Balance is the rhythm of twos, series is the rhythm of threes, and parallel serial constructions echo, invoke, and build upon our penchant for measuring, describing, and constructing reality in units of threes. In the next lecture, I'm going to return to explore further the idea that balance and three-part serials are much more than just syntactic patterns and are deeply imbricated in our understanding of the world. But for now, I just want to call attention to the three-part series as the obvious counterpart and complement to the two-part rhythms and constructions of balance. Three phrases of parallel construction, three-part predicates, three attempts to say exactly the right thing, all invoke serial form. A series, however, is more than just a list with three or more items in it. At the heart of this form is some kind of unity, some kind of progression, some kind of intensification. What distinguishes the series is that its elements build on each other, add to each other's impact, restate and refine each other's information. For example, can we imagine a more effective explanation than Nabokov's three-part series Reasons for Granting Interviews Only in Writing? I think like a genius, I write like a distinguished author, I speak like a child. Or the series may mark a temporal progression, establish a chronology, outline a process. In a way, the series is a kind of balance that has been extended, since the more parallel the elements of the series, whether elements of syntax, diction, sound, or concept, the more pronounced the serial construction. As Caesar put it in perhaps the most famous three-part series we have, Wane, Weedy, Weeky, I came, I saw, I conquered. The most pronounced serial construction has three parts. Although a series can be extended beyond three elements or reduced to two. Winston Weathers, in a pioneering essay on the rhetoric of the series, notes that the writer can write the two-part series and create an aura of certainty, confidence, didacticism, and dogmatism, or can write the three-part series and create the effect of the normal, the reasonable, the believable, and the logical. Or can write the four or more part series and suggest the human, emotional, diffuse, and inexplicable. Weathers sees the choice a writer makes between creating the two-beat rhythm of balance or the three-beat rhythm of the three-part parallel series as a choice between the almost authoritarian implications of balance with its implications of finality and totality, a sense that there is nothing more to be said, or a sense of massive, abrupt, and final summary, and the aura of the true and believable sample offered by the three-part series. Referring to the fact that the syllogism has three parts, major premise, minor premise, conclusion, Weathers suggests that the three-part series offers a, quote, sense of the reasonable and even the logical, end quote. To him, and I certainly agree, the series, in going one step beyond the binary oppositions of balance, achieves the rhetorical effect of something more reasonable, ordinary, and more truly representative. And he clinches his argument with the balance claim that the series has the touch of the common and understandable. Tellingly, Weathers himself employs balanced form to describe the series and three-part serial constructions to describe balance. As the example of his own prose suggests, the ties among kinds of serial constructions are quite complex. Since one three-part series balances quite effectively against another, a three-part series may be composed of three two-part balances, and the four-part series can easily be shaped to lend its catalog to either two- or three-part rhythm. Furthermore, serial constructions invite asyndeton, the omitting of conjunctions, or polysyndeton, the foregrounded excessive use of conjunctions. I came, I saw, I conquered could have been said, I came, and I saw, and I conquered, which would be polysyndeton, or I came, saw, conquered, asyndeton. Sounds to me like Caesar got it right, even if he did crib the general form from the ending of Aristotle's rhetoric. Asyndeton seems to suggest simultaneity and speed. Aristotle suggested it had the added effect of seeming to say many things at the same time, while polysyndeton seems to suggest distinct stages or differences and deliberate intensity. He has had his intuition, he has made his discovery, he is eager to explore it, to reveal it, to fix it down. It was a hot day, and the sky was very bright and blue, and the road was white and dusty. That last one from Hemingway, of course. Another rhetorical device invited by serial constructions is anaphora, beginning each element in the series with the same word or words. The reason why I object to Dr. Johnson's style is that there is no discrimination, no selection, no variety in it. Or, art, for most Americans, is a very queer fish. It can't be reasoned with, it can't be bribed, it can't be doped out or duplicated. Above all, it can't be cashed in on. Of course, the opposite of anaphora is epistrophe, ending each item in a series with the same word or words. To the good American, many subjects are sacred. Sex is sacred. Women are sacred. Children are sacred. Business is sacred. America is sacred. Masonic lodges and college clubs are sacred. Here's another one. Raphael paints wisdom. Handel sings it. Phidias carves it. Shakespeare writes it. Wren builds it. Columbus sails it. Luther preaches it. Washington arms it. Watt mechanizes it. That one from Emerson. Combine anaphora and epistrophe and you get simplicy. I was born an American. I will live an American. I shall die an American. That from Daniel Webster. Just as was the case with balance, three-part serials can be overdone. Of course, this is true of all of the syntactical patterns we've been working with, and for that matter, it's true of just about everything in general. However, for reasons I'll try to explain shortly, modern readers probably have a much greater tolerance for pronounced serial constructions than they have for pronounced balance. And the three-part series does not seem as tied to the rhetoric of earlier centuries as does balance. In a word, it sounds more reasonable. Indeed, its evocation of logic and reason seems to be one of the great sources of the rhetorical effectiveness of three-part serials. Whenever I write serial constructions, it's a little bit like taking a long plane flight with a couple of connections, a couple of stops that actually help me reach my destination, a couple of brief layovers during which I can rethink my itinerary, remind myself of what remains to be done, and redouble my efforts to ensure that the trip accomplishes its purpose, gets me where I need to go, or at least provides the satisfying illusion that I'm going somewhere. This analogy doesn't bear too much scrutiny, however, since my reasons for taking plane flights are almost always generated from without, required by some clear need to get to a specific destination, driven by events to which I may choose to respond or not, but which I never completely control. Writing a series, on the other hand, simply seems to come out of the blue. An opportunity that just presents itself as my sentence unfolds, generated from somewhere within my understanding of syntactic options, required by some amorphous sense that 3 tries are better than 1, driven only by some internal metronome that is deaf to the appeal of a waltz, but that longs for the rhythm of 3s in my writing. The narrative rhythm of beginning, middle, and end, the progressive rhythm of going, gone, the conceptual rhythm of a world that conforms itself to the debater's confidently raised 3 fingers, the syllogisms, 3 parts, the 3 elements themselves, earth, fire, and water. When I begin to write, I rarely have a destination in mind for each sentence. much less a plan for marching the steps of the sentence according to some specific cadence. But somewhere after my first word, it must occur to me that I haven't said exactly what I wanted to say, haven't gotten the words quite right, haven't painted the picture for my reader that I see so clearly, or, as I suspect is more often the case, haven't clearly painted the picture that still remains stubbornly fuzzy to my straining imagination. In these cases, I usually try again. But something about two efforts at getting the words right often feels incomplete, unsatisfying, awkward. So I run through my options, searching for the third word, third phrase, third sound that will release me from the apparent need to sound more reasonable, ordinary, and understandable, that will free me from the compulsion to offer a reasonable sample, and that will let me start a new sentence in which, against all odds, I just might say exactly what I want to say, might get the words precisely right, might paint the masterpiece of my dreams, or failing that, might content myself with the belligerence of the balance, the sprawl of the catalog, or any prose rhythm that startles the eye and ear, some rude reggae in place of the waltz. And here's another example of my own attempt to tap the power of serial construction. Each of us has experienced moments in which, for some unfathomable reason, we have done exactly the inappropriate thing, made the perfectly inane remark, responded to a person, statement, or event with no sense of proportion whatsoever, no sense of self-awareness, no sense of how fatal our lack of judgment will immediately seem. In such moments of incredible awkwardness, time stops. We see puzzled or shocked expressions creep across the faces of those around us. The sudden silence crashes in our ears, and we desperately want the fatal word or action back, want a second take in the movie of life, pray for a second chance. We cannot believe what we have done, cannot escape our burning embarrassment, and finally, we can only face the bleak prospect of trying to gloss over or undo the damage, knowing full well we have no chance. These are moments of rarest paranoia and despair, moments frozen in humiliation, a time when, if life itself does not seem hopelessly absurd, we certainly do. Usually these moments of acute, ego-shattering embarrassment come from nowhere, randomly, exploding into miserable being when a maverick thought eludes our normally vigilant censoring codes of conduct and social survival. Moments when our carefully constructed defensive shields drop for the briefest moment, when for a horrifying instant we shock and dismay ourselves with a totally honest, uncalculated, and wildly free reaction to the world around us. Just as Dr. Johnson is the exemplum par excellence of balance, Francis Bacon is the Triple Crown winner of three-part serial form, with his Of Studies, possibly the most intense example we have of sustained serial construction. Studies serve for delight, for ornament, and for ability. Their chief use for delight is in privateness and retiring, for ornament is in discourse, and for ability is in the judgment and disposition of business. For expert men can execute and perhaps judge of particulars one by one, but the general counsels and the plots and marshalling of affairs come best from those that are learned. To spend too much time in studies is sloth, to use them too much for ornament is affectation, to make judgment wholly by their rules is the humor of a scholar. They perfect nature and are perfected by experience. Crafty men contemn studies. Simple men admire them, and wise men use them, for they teach not their own use, but that is a wisdom without them and above them, won by observation. Read not to contradict and confute, nor to believe and take for granted, nor to find talk and discourse, but to weigh and consider. Some books are to be tasted, others to be swallowed, and some few to be chewed and digested. Reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man. Or, consider the following triple treat paragraph by Klaus, my colleague at Iowa, and along with novelist Thomas Berger, one of my two great mentors in matters having to do with prose style. This from Karl. I am fascinated by parallel series. I spend hours probing their mysteries. I worship their ideal form. I look for them in my reading. I strive for them in my writing. I contrive them even when I am talking. So obsessed am I by them that my thoughts are forever upon them. Whether I am brushing my teeth, washing my car, hoeing my garden, eating my dinner, tying my shoes, grooming my dog, myself, or my fly line. So Bacon is my master, my idol, my bane. I study him, I imitate him, I envy him. I require my students to read him, to analyze him, to emulate him. I ask no more of them than of myself, no less of them than they are capable, as much of them as they can produce and the language will bear. I wonder how this obsession will end, in mastery, in mockery, or in madness. I cannot predict, but I know I cannot continue as I am at present, working to create, laboring to contrive, struggling to perfect the Baconian style. Doing so has led me to defy my master, to mar his masterpieces, to mend his mastery. Thus I am committed to a single form, one style, the syntax of a perfect series, hoping to excel him and so to be free of him forever. I should take just a moment here to recommend to you the remarkable range of nonfiction essays and contemplations of Karl Klaus. Karl has written and edited prolifically in the fields of writing and stylistic theory, and his work on composition and prose style has shaped much of my thinking and that of writing teachers across the nation. Of particular value are his Elements of Writing, co-authored with Robert Scholes, his Style in English Prose, his award-winning Courses for Change in Writing, co-authored with Nancy Jones, and his in-depth Essayists for Our Time, co-authored with Chris Anderson and Rebecca Ferry. But Karl's greatest appeal to those of us trying to improve the effectiveness of our own writing is in his own justly celebrated creative nonfiction. He's the author of My Vegetable Love, a journal of a growing season, a memoir that celebrates Karl's love of gardening and all of the things that touch upon his gardening, including reflections on everything from the weather to his wife, with grandchildren, academe, and dogs, cats, and neighbors in between. This book, and what might be considered its sequel, Weathering Winter, A Gardener's Daybook, remind us that elegant prose exploiting all of the syntactic devices in the history of the English language not only need not sound artificial or strained, but can make the most natural of subjects come alive. Karl's Taking Retirement, A Beginner's Diary, contemplates the losses and the gains of retiring from a lifetime of passionate teaching, and as a book I am certain I will reread again and again as I approach my own retirement. And his Letters to Kate, Life After Life, is Karl's moving, at times heartbreaking, and always insightful exploration of loss and grief following the sudden death in 2002 of his wife. No, this unabashed plug for Karl Klaus's writing is not a new low-end product placement, nor do I own stock in Karl's literary enterprises. What I do find and want to celebrate in his works is writing reminiscent of the wisdom we find in E.B. White, but with more joy in and crafting of language than we normally encounter in White's wonderful letters and essays. And besides, you already knew about E.B. White. It's my pleasure to introduce you to the syntactic mastery and the delicious sentences of Karl Klaus. Not incidentally, Karl is also the visionary founder of Iowa's MFA in Nonfiction program, and both directly and indirectly, his influence on several generations of award-winning nonfiction writers has simply been huge. But more to the point of this lecture, from Klaus we can learn that the basic patterns for serial construction can be categorized in terms of those for, and first of all, Karl talks about those for the phrasal series. An example, the lake is crystal clear, dead calm, and freezing cold. Or another, aerobic exercise helps one lose weight safely, improve muscle tone, and reduce stress. Another, rain drips through the trees in no hurry to meet the earth, trickles down the trunk, seeps into the ground, percolates down and reaches its goal to merge with the aquifer. And then there are those for the clausal or elliptical series, another way of achieving parallel series. Hearing their parents' car drive up, one teen hid the Jack Daniels, another turned off the X-rated movie, and a third shooed their friends out the back door. Traditional classrooms can foster boredom, televised classes, isolation, correspondence classes, guilt. Another, assume nothing, appropriate nothing, assign, ascribe, associate nothing, repeat not a word until you ascertain the truth of it for yourself. And then there are those rhetorical tropes, several of which we've already noted and which Karl reminds us of. There are schemes of omission, as I've mentioned before, asyndeton, to omit the conjunctions that usually link the final items in a series of coordinate words, phrases, or clauses. I came, I saw, I conquered. Here's an example. He was 10 inches long, thin as a curve, a muscled ribbon, brown as fruit wood, soft-furred, alert. I think that from Annie Dillard. Aristotle ends his rhetoric with the confident asyndeton. I have done, you have heard me, the facts are before you, I ask for your judgment. Another trope is ellipsis, to omit one or more words that are obviously necessary but must be inferred to make a construction grammatically complete, as we saw in Bacon's reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man, or as we can see in Nabokov's, I prefer the specific detail to the generalization, images to ideas, obscure facts to clear symbols, and the discovered wild fruit to the synthetic jam. Then there are schemes of repetition. We're very familiar with the most obvious of these, alliteration, to repeat the initial consonants in neighboring or in grammatically corresponding words. Spiro Agnew's description of the press as nattering nabobs of negativism gives us an example of this serial technique used as a bludgeon. And then, as I've already mentioned, there's anaphora, to repeat a word or phrase at the beginning of successive sentences, clauses, phrases. I should have gone for the throat, I should have lunged for that streak of white under the weasel's chin and held on through mud and into the wild rose, held on for a dearer life. That from Annie Dillard's Living Like a Weasel. Eldridge Cleaver revealed his control of both anaphora and ellipsis in his striking declaration in Soul on Ice. I'm perfectly aware that I'm in prison, that I'm a Negro, that I've been a rapist, and that I have a higher uneducation. And then there's anadiplosis, which always sounds like a bovine disease to me. Anadiplosis is to repeat a word that ends one phrase, clause, or sentence at the beginning of the next. Learn as though you would live forever, live as though you would die tomorrow. And then there's assonance, to repeat similar vowel sounds in neighboring or in grammatically corresponding words. His journal is tracks in clay, a spray of feathers, mouse blood and bone, uncollected, unconnected, loose leaf, and blown. That also from Annie Dillard. And then one of my favorite constructions of all, chiasmus, to repeat a grammatical structure and the words it contains, but to reverse the order of the key words in the second phrase, clause, or sentence. We've seen the bumper sticker example of chiasmus: when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And I'm particularly fond of Hunter Thompson's variation: when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. But chiasmus can be a very effective and memorable persuasive device. The press is so powerful in its image-making role that it can make a criminal look like he's the victim and make the victim look like he's the criminal. That also from Eldridge Cleaver. Then there's a panalepsis, to repeat the same word or phrase at the beginning and end of a clause or sentence. Tribe follows tribe, nation follows nation, like the waves of the sea. That from Chief Seattle. We've already seen examples of epistrophe, to repeat the same word or phrase at the end of successive phrases, clauses, or sentences. They loved football, they ate football, they slept football. Of course, probably the most familiar examples we have of epistrophe are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Then there's a larger scheme called isocolon, a form of parallelism that stresses corresponding words, phrases, clauses, and sentences of equal length and similar structure. Churchill's famous "Never in the history of mankind have so many owed so much to so few" illustrates the form. And he is asked to stand, he wants to sit, and he is expected to lie reveals some of its potential for pointed humor. And then there's polyptoton, to repeat words with the same root but different forms of endings. Poverty and isolation produce impoverished and isolated minds, as an example of polyptoton at the start of a much longer sentence in William Gass's On Being Blue. Matthew Clark points to Nabokov's fondness for polyptoton in Ada, where he refers to a specular and hence speculatory phenomenon, divinities and divines, and the collected works of uncollected authors. And then another one we're familiar with by now, polysyndeton, to repeat conjunctions between coordinate words, phrases, or clauses in a series. Joan Didion frequently relies on polysyndeton in her writing, as she does in Some Dreamers of the Golden Dream, that opens with the almost polysyndeton of "This is a story about love and death and the golden land," and begins with the country. Then it quickly gets down to the real thing. It is the season of suicide and divorce and prickly dread whenever the wind blows. Yeats gives us a wonderful example of the calming, slowing effect of polysyndeton in the opening lines of his poem, When You Were Old. When you were old and gray and full of sleep. And I bet more than a few of us can supply the next phrase, and nodding by the fire. Then simplicy. This is a twofer scheme in which the combination in a sequence of phrases, clauses, or sentences of anaphora repeating the first word and epistrophe repeating the final word creates simplicy, as William Blake employed this scheme in his Proverbs of Hell. The pride of the peacock is the glory of God. The lust of the goat is the bounty of God. The wrath of the lion is the wisdom of God. The nakedness of woman is the work of God. And then another large scheme, tricolon. Matthew Clark, reminding us of the human tendency to compose groups of three, specifies that a tripling of phrases, clauses, or sentences is called tricolon, and adds, quote, "If the phrases are arranged so that they progressively increase in length, the figure is called tricolon crescendo," offering Nabokov's reference in Ada to a character's long, too long, never too long life as an example. Obviously, most, if not all, of our examples of three-part parallel series display some form of tricolon. These are but a few of the rhetorical schemes and tropes that can create and intensify parallelism in general and three-part serials in particular. There's some disagreement about the difference between a trope and a scheme, but generally tropes have primarily to do with meaning, either of a word whose meaning is changed or extended, while schemes have to do with the ordering of words and sounds. Accordingly, we might think of a metaphor as a trope, while repetition or alliteration would be a scheme. Let's just call both rhetorical moves. Richard Lanham specifies some 34 different rhetorical moves associated with the creation of balance or antithesis, and some 36 associated with parallelism of letters, syllables, sounds, words, clauses, phrases, sentences, and ideas. So this small sampling only begins to suggest the care with which ancient orators and writers constructed their discourse. To be effective writers, we certainly don't need to command even all of the relatively few forms I've just mentioned. But just knowing that these forms exist increases the likelihood that we will find some occasion in which it makes sense to tap some of their power.